Okay. So, hello, everybody. This is Stephen M., and I'm in Teresa's living room with Teresa and our featured speaker today, Tom K. Can't wait to hear his story. And so, why don't I let him begin? So, I suppose the first question, Tom, is tell us about how you got into AA.
Well, I'm considered a low bottom drunk. Years before people, uh, I had a tough time getting into the program. I lost everything. I lost my family. I lost my job. I lost the investments and ended up with nothing and basically on the street. And my grandfather had retired and he was in pretty good shape. So he helped me out financially, or else I'd be out there in one of those tents the way it is now. Uh, I had 10 years of being out on the field before I ended up at Swedish Hospital. I had, I think it was 6 drunk driving charges, 8 times at Swedish Hospital, 1 shot at Hazelton.
In Minnesota?
Yeah. There was still a farmhouse. They hadn't built the facility, so it was still in its infancy. 2 psychiatric hospitals, 4 psychiatrists, and some ministers thrown in, and some friends. All were saying, "Look what you're doing to yourself." And of course, um, I didn't want to stop. I just kept right on going. I used to be in the investment banking business, and I used to entertain and really good beer, good stuff, good booze.
Here in the Seattle area?
Yeah. And so entertaining was part of my project. And I went from drinking good booze to vanilla extract and shaving lotion and sterno. Anything that for the effect, I didn't care what it had, any flavor or anything. It was just a matter of getting something to be high on. And it hadn't been decriminalized, so I ended up a lot of times in jail. And I'm familiar with the drunk tank. It's not a nice place, by the way. And you know when the weekend is because it fills up. They keep throwing guys in. And there's a padded, it's got a pad on it, and that's it, and 1 toilet in the corner, and that's the drunk tank, plus the bars. J.D. O'Malley is a bail bondsman, and he became familiar with me. So he'd come in, he'd check the list, and I thought I was going to be in there for a while. So he said, "Do you want to get?" They said, "Do you want to get out?" I said, "Yeah." Well, J.D. O'Malley is going to bail you out, and I had made a promise. I said, "Lord, if you get me out of this time, I promise I'll never drink again."
So they had foxhole prayers way back in the 60s.
So I got out and I went right across the street to Spin's Tavern, which is on 2nd Avenue. I don't know if it's still there or not. And had a few beers to celebrate. I was in 2 facilities, as I mentioned, and none of this had to do with treating alcoholism. When I went into the hospital, it was just to dry out and get ready for the next one. There was no treatment involved at Swedish Hospital. Hazelton is a 4-week project. They expected you to do the first 5 steps at Hazelton, and I wasn't even, I showed up drunk at Hazleton. Um, they called me and they said, okay, we'll pick you up at the airport, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I said, I'll be wearing a red sweater and a blue coat. They said, okay, we'll meet you. And so I didn't wear, I wore a green sweater and changed the colors. And I told them that sounds familiar to an alcoholic, doesn't it? And then the route was Seattle to Spokane, Northwest Airlines, and then Spokane to Minneapolis. And so I had a few drinks here in Seattle and then a few on the plane. And in other words, I was drunk when I showed up at the airport. So I went into the bar and was having another one. And this guy came up to me and he said, welcome to St. Paul, Minneapolis, Tom. And I said, I'm not Tom. And he said, yes, you are. And so it was about a 2-hour drive back to the facility. He said, are you still thirsty? And I said, yeah, I am, as a matter of fact. He said, well, we'll make a stop. And I said, this Hazelden deal might not be a bad deal. But I showed up in really bad shape. So for the first 10 days, I didn't know where I was. I was in what they called the dog run. I was in a really bad place. And so by the time I got out of there, the program was about a third over, and I got a counselor, and I remember him saying to me, "Here's a kit that we call it the 4-step, and it's an inventory. It's a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself, and then fill it out tonight because tomorrow you're going to share that with the Reverend so and so." Which I said, okay, but to this day, I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember his name. I don't remember the form. I don't remember the answers. I don't remember anything about it. So that was my first adventure in the 4th and 5th steps. Um, the interesting thing is, I finally, after 10 years of all of the escapades and all of the drunk trials, and the judges got to know me pretty well. I ended up at Swedish Hospital, and I knew that this was the end because everything had happened. There wasn't anything else left to do. This was the end of the line, and you got to sober up. You've got to do something about this. You've lost everything. You're at the bottom. The bottom is the bottom. There is no more bottom left. You're on it, and I don't want to be there. And the interesting thing is, I was in the hospital bed, and I said, but the reason I'm here was I was drinking bad booze, really rock gut, apple candy, and
Here we go.
Thank you so much.
fortified wine, and it was really garbage. Bad stuff. And I said, so if I'm going to stop drinking, I want to go out in style. And so what I did was I put my V-neck sweater on over my white gown, put my trousers on, and had my shoes. And my room was right next to the exit. I was on basically the first floor. And so I went down the exit, and it's a self-locked door down when you do that, down the exit. So I put a rock in the door. I was still thinking pretty good.
Pretty good.
I put a rock in the door and went to the Seattle First National Bank on Madison. And I think I had about $15 in the account, which was all I had. So I closed the account, took the money, and walked back to the Dunbar room in the Sorrento Hotel. and I had two martinis, third stool from the left, and went back to the hotel or the hospital. And the next day, there were two guys that came to see me from the program, and it was a classic picture of the guy in the bed, and then Bill and Bob coming to see him.
Sure.
It's exactly what happened. They didn't tell me, look what you've done. You know, you're going to have to stop drinking. You're going to kill yourself.
And this is 1966.
This was, yeah, the year 66. And so they shared their experience, strength, and hope with me, and I'd never heard them, a person tell my story. So it was amazing that they said, this is what we did. This is what's available. You're more than welcome to join us. So the next day I checked out and checked myself into a halfway house. There were two halfway houses in Seattle at the time, and I'd been in both of them. So my step one was at the hospital. I think the thing is, back in the old days, it was really hard AA. Step one, don't drink, go to meetings, and you'll be fine. Because in 18 years of sobriety in Seattle before I moved to Houston, nobody ever told me to write a detailed inventory. They just didn't do it. It wasn't recommended. I think what changed a lot of the things was the decriminalization of alcohol and the treatment facilities. I think the treatment facilities brought in a lot of changes. Back in the old days, people were alcoholics. They weren't duly addicted. There was pure alcohol, and if you were at a meeting, you were an alcoholic. And as you probably know, there were maybe some old timers that got upset over that when somebody said, "I'm an addict." It didn't bother me because they were also there because of alcohol. They weren't drinking alcohol either, so more power to them.
So just to circle back a little bit, before you went to Hazleton, we're still 1966, right?
I was still drinking.
Right. What were you doing then? What was your life like before you went to Hazleton?
What
Were you still working?
No, I lost all the jobs I had in the investment banking business, and I had 3 or 4 good jobs, and I was fired from all of them.
Is that so? That had been the early 60s or late 50s?
Yeah, 50s and 60s, and I started in the investment business in 57. I was after being an officer in the Marine Corps.
Semper Fi.
Yeah, yeah. Were you an officer in the Marine?
Not an officer, not a commissioned officer.
But
you wouldn't have liked me. My MOS was 5811, military police.
The old MP. Well, you would have taken me to jail to the Hooskow a lot. But I had lived and worked in the halfway house, and I wanted to get back in the investment banking business. And there was a very good client when I was still sober working at Foster and Marshall, an investment banking firm. And I said, Joe, do you think I can make a comeback here in Seattle, or do I have to go away somewhere else and start brand new? And he said, I think you can make it here in Seattle. He said, as a matter of fact, we're going to be looking for somebody a low paying job in the investment department, part of the trust area, and I'll recommend it to you. I'll make a recommendation that we interview you. So they looked at some guy in San Francisco at head office. they were going to bring a pretty high-powered guy up, and for some strange reason, higher power at work. I got the job, and that was the beginning of the process of building a career back in the investment banking business. Um, I
One
did.
time before the going back, there's that interesting story about the being a janitor at the Smith Tower.
At the West.
Janitor at the, was it the Rainier Club?
Washington Athletic.
Washington Athletic
Oh
Club.
yeah, I had a lot of wild. I was a janitor. They hired me as a janitor at the WAC,
So you met Ralph there?
and
I don't know if you knew him then.
and he looked at my resume and he said, "You're overqualified." I said, "I need the job." So he said, "Okay." So I was a janitor, and I'd go up and down the elevator with a mop and a broom and a floor buffer. And guys, friends of mine in the investment business would come in the elevator to go up and have lunch, and they'd do a double take, and they'd look at me and they'd say, "Tom, is that you?" I said, "Yeah, that's me." And so they did a double take, and so the boss came to me. He said, "Is there anybody else that's living up there with you that needs a job? Because you've done an outstanding job. We'd like to hire somebody else like you." I said, "Yeah, I've got a friend that needs a job." So I went back to the house and told him, "I got a job for you. Let's go to the job." So the first 4 hours, you have to go around and get signatures and pick up your equipment and your uniform and get all your stuff done. And it was about noon, and I said, "Let's go out to lunch and celebrate that we got jobs." So we went down on 6th Avenue to the Green Apple. It was a restaurant, and it had a side entrance to the bar. So we both smashed, went back to the Washington Athletic Club, and he was fired immediately. He never got a job. He didn't even get one day. They told me, "Go home. We don't want to get rid of you, and come back sober." So the next day I came back and stopped off and had a few drinks before, and then I had a couple more. And the guy said, "Gee, you're sure drinking those pretty fast, aren't you?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And so I passed out up on the very top of the Washington Athletic building. There was a living or a dining area and a bathroom. And I was passed out in the bathroom, and he found me, and so they let me go. I was asked to be in the real estate business by a friend, and I was showing on the east side in Bellevue. And on a Sunday, I was asked to show a house in Clyde Hill with a swimming pool, and it had a complete bar. It was a lady who went south every year, and so she left the house, but it was for sale. And so I said, "It's a shame. I'm looking at this bar. It's full of booze. There's a swimming pool." So I called back to some of the guys at the halfway house, and I said, "Hey, here's the address. Come on over.
Party time, huh?
And we'll have a few drinks and have a swim." Well, there was another salesman for the firm that had a house up about 4 or 5 blocks away, and he drove by where I was, and he noticed that all hell had broken loose, and so he told the owner, and the owner proceeded to come and see me. I was living in the north end, upstairs in another house. I rented a room at the top of this house with a back entrance. And he said, "God," he said, "I could lose my license." he said, "You better give me the keys, the lock keys to open the houses." And another experience, I was in jail, and I had back-to-back drunk driving charges. I always wanted a red car. I was in an accident, so my car was immobile. So I rented a red Dodge from, I think it was S.L. Savage.
Yeah, down Westlake.
Downtown. Yeah. And so I got picked up by the same policeman on the freeway. And so I had two back-to-back drunk driving charges. And Judge Charles Z. Smith, he's black, but he became a Superior Court judge, and he knew me very well because I've been in front of him maybe 4 or 5 times. He said, "Well, Mr. Kubley, you're back," and
We're okay. We're okay.
yeah. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I'm going to give you 6 months for the first one and 6 months for the other one. That's a year in jail." So I thought I was going to be in jail for a whole year because they came down the list and they said, "Do you want to work in the kitchen or do you want to work in the laundry?" And I said, "I'm only going to be here for a couple of weeks," because he said, subject to 2 weeks, how things go. And he said, "No, you're not. You're here for a year." So fortunately, the owner of the halfway house realized that I was doing fairly well. And so he bailed me out, but he didn't make it 2 weeks. He said, "Don't let him go this soon." He said, "He'll go right back out and drink again. So keep him longer." And he said, "Well, how much longer do you want me to keep him?" And I said, "What are you doing to me?" So it was about a month, as I remember, in jail at that time. But I was in jail 5 or 6 times. That's what happened because they didn't decriminalize alcohol until I think it was in the 70s. And so if you were drunk or drunk in public, you'd go to the drunk tank or jail. There was no deferred prosecution back in those days.
So, Tom, back to you're at Swedish Hospital, and 2 men from AA came to talk to you.
Yeah.
Do you remember what meeting you went to after that? Where it was?
I don't know who they were.
No, where the meeting was. Was it at the big hall?
No, they didn't take me to a meeting. They 12-step me at the hospital.
Right, trying to get you. Where did you start going to meetings?
It's from the halfway house that I moved into the next day. I started going to the big hall.
To the big hall.
To Green Lake, to some of the downtown meetings. And it was, in those days, they had what was called a table mate. I don't know if you're familiar.
I am.
It had subjects that you could use for topics for meetings. And so a lot of the meetings used that. But the interesting thing is, nowadays people get a sponsor, they do the 4-step writing, you make a list of people you'd harm, became willing to make amends to them all. They never did any of that. And when I mentioned 18 years, I was sober in Seattle, going to a lot of meetings, doing a lot of volunteer work, a lot of 12-step work.
So did you work at Intergroup then? Was on Queen Anne then?
There wasn't really an intergroup. There was a guy by the name of Dick Silver.
Oh, yeah. Right.
On 2nd Avenue, who was kind of the go-to guy. If you had a problem, you'd go see Dick Silver, and he would say, "Go to an AA meeting."
You were on the east side too. You started some stuff over on the east.
Yeah, I was on the board of the East Side Referral then referral centers started showing up. Um, and I was at Bank of California, the job that I got through a friend, and I did a good enough job that they wanted me to go to head office in San Francisco. So I was going with a young lady at the time because I'd been divorced, got kicked out of the house. And I said, I have to go to San Francisco to keep my career going, but I'm sober only, I think it was a year and a half, but I can't go unless you go with me. She said, well, I'll go with you. So we got married and ended up in San Francisco, which was the next level up job wise. And I did a good job there. And so Blythe and Company back in Seattle wanted me to take over as an institutional sales department. So I took that job. That was another higher job. Seattle First hired me in the investment banking department. I was recruited by a headhunter for a job in Houston. And the interesting thing is, that was after 18 years of sobriety here in Seattle. And for some reason, I took the job, and I ended up in Houston with my wife at the time. And I thought, what am I doing here? This is a huge city. It's hot, it's humid, there's nothing here. And I'm convinced that the higher power uh, sent me to Houston because I'd never done a fourth and fifth step by the book.
So now we're in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Real early.
Yeah. 80s, right. And so Houston, I didn't like it at all, but I was active in the program down there, and I'm convinced that I was sent there to do 4 and 5 because I was on a dry drunk down there. I didn't connect to the program immediately. I got really squirrely and mentally and emotionally. And the four sobrieties that I usually talk about: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. My mental and emotional state was not good. And so I said, I need to figure out, I got to look at the program and what steps do I need to work on right now in order to save my sobriety? Because it, it, it was 18 years and I was really pretty shaky. So I said, I've never done a fourth and fifth step by the book because nobody ever asked me to do it, or made a list of people we'd harmed. Nobody ever asked me to do that in 18 years. And I don't think that was unusual, by the way. I think in the early days, there wasn't a lot of writing. There was a lot of hard ass step one, don't drink, and go to meetings. And that was the routine of the mantra, so to speak. Don't drink and go to meetings. So I stayed at Houston and 2 years, and it was a rough 2 years because it's a tough city, and it was a tough job, a big job, a huge job. And I was very uncomfortable, and I got a call from somebody in Seattle from Smith Barney. Said, are you interested in coming back to Seattle? There was an opening in the high net worth program, dealing with high net worth individuals. And I said, yes, I am. And so I interviewed for that. They flew me back to New York, and I got that job. And so I was in Seattle for the next few years. And then uh, I had a call from somebody about that was I interested in going to Bellingham to set up a brand new investment division to the bank. They're covering the 4 or 5 counties up in that area. And it sounded like an interesting challenge, so I took that. And then after a few years, bank account called again and said the person is retiring. Do you want to come back and take over the investment division of bank account in Seattle? And we were going together at the time. So I said, yes, I am. And so I came back, and it didn't really work out very well. So I took early retirement.
So wait, you two were going together?
We met in the mid-80s, and he had,
Well, he's just robbing the cradle, huh?
yeah, he's been taking care of me. I just had a knee replacement surgery, and he was my caretaker, and he did a fabulous job. I don't know what I would have done without him.
Good going, Tom.
And we met at a retreat,
But it
Serenity
was,
retreat.
but I did some wild, crazy things, like a lot of alcoholics. And looking back now, I was lucky that I wasn't killed or dead or shot or whatever because of some of the things that I did. It was way out of line. But
So what was your experience then in Houston doing the fourth and fifth step?
I did a fourth and fifth step. I did my fourth step and I filled a notebook full of everything using a format that they use down there, which is really, they use an example of a four step. So it showed you exactly how to do the columns, and it worked out very well. And so I said, now I need to find somebody.
Yeah, I can pause this for us.
He takes me a while to get up. God said, "Oh,
Because people that have been sober a long time can still go through some suffering. So that's all inclusive. That's everybody that's in the program.
but you also chair a meeting
And
today."
I was involved at this local city and state level in terms of alcoholism and drug addiction. I've got plaques at home stating, thank you for your service. The Governor Dan Evans, I've got a picture with Dan Evans. I was voted #1 volunteer in the state. This was years ago, when I was at the halfway house. And so I served on the East Side Referral Center of King County Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Center. There are a couple of other ones that I served on that tried to carry the message through the agencies.
So you were over on the east side when they opened up the Alano Club?
Yeah, I was part of the with Mike Marr.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was part. I put some money down. I owned part of that.
My last drink was in the parking lot of that building.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I still go in there and get coins and have a cup of coffee, and they got a lot of meetings every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a good deal.
Oh, I spent my first 3 years, I lived there. So
Well,
Yeah,
you helped
I understand.
fundraise, and you helped put
Yeah.
flyers together and all kinds of stuff. You lived on the east side, right?
Pardon?
You lived on the east side. You lived in.
Yeah, so I'm involved. My meetings, Mercer Island used to be my home group.
Thursday night or Sunday night?
Thursday.
Thursday night at Emmanuel Church.
Yeah,
Still there.
it's still, that's one of the longest running meetings there is.
Yeah, I lived on Mercer Island, just 2 blocks from there, and
Oh, you do?
yeah, I did.
Yeah, do you go to the meetings still there?
No, that was 30 some years ago.
Yeah,
But I did go to Thursday night there, and I went to Sunday night,
yeah.
and made some dear friends from that Thursday night meeting. Clint Farrell, Clint F. Did you know him, the attorney?
Who?
Clint.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
Yeah.
he became one of my dearest friends in AA.
yeah. I'm losing a lot of friends these days.
Yeah.
I've lost 3 sponsees in the last 6 months. And it hurts when you lose somebody that you have a connection in the program because it's a special relationship. It's not just a friend. It's a brother. And so it hurts when you lose those people, and it's a loss to the program too because they were all three of them were instrumental in carrying the message.
Sure. Then you knew Bruce, the pastor from Sunday night.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a dear friend too.
Yeah. Yeah. Bruce is a good man. He's back in town.
I didn't. The last I heard, he'd retired.
He retired
in Port Townsend or over on the peninsula somewhere.
I don't know where he is now, but he retired.
Huh.
You were at Wedgwood for a long time too. That Wedgwood was your home group, wasn't it, for years?
Wedgwood was my home group when I first got sober. All men's group on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of friends that are gone from there too. They're slipping away.
So, Tom, what's different in AA now than used to be when you were there?
It used to be hard-ass AA, like the Green Lake group had three guys that were Heine, Grant, and Dick, and it was no BS. It was don't drink and go to meetings, and they take your inventory. If you didn't want to take one, they tell you what was wrong with you. It was pure alcoholics. It wasn't a mixture. The group has got a lot younger. There's a lot of young kids now that are coming in. When I came in at the age of 33, I was one of the youngest in the program. I remember guys used to say, "What are you doing here? You're only 33." And then they'd hear my story, and then they say, "Oh, you're welcome." But I think the 30-day inpatient treatment programs have made a big difference. And I don't think some of it is all wonderful. I think some of the things that have happened have changed the program. And you can always start a new program, but some of them kind of got off base a little bit and are off track. They're not pure AA. And so I like to go to step meetings because that's how I got sober and that's how I stay sober.
Right.
Is using the steps of the program. And I think there's more writing now. I think people are getting sponsors, and the sponsors are holding the line and saying, "Okay, now it's time for you to do a fourth step and a fifth step." So I think there's more structure nowadays in the program than there was in the old days.
And do you see that as more helpful or?
Yeah, I think it's important because I look back on my own story and how important 4 and 5 were to me and how it became really important. So I think doing work with a sponsor is probably a good thing. And I think there's more of that going on now than there was in the early days. Because for 18 years, as I said, nobody mentioned to me it's time to do a fourth step and a fifth step. And by the way, also make a list of people that you've harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. And here's how you make amends. It's not cookie cutter amends. Each one has to be specifically thought about in a different matter. What are you going to say to this person? Because they're not all the same.
Wow.
You did another fifth a few years ago.
Pardon?
You did another fourth and fifth a few years ago.
Yeah, I do. I do many fourth steps. If a defective character begins to come back again, I realize it. I can feel it, in my soul. And so I'll do some writing on it and then find somebody in the program that I trust and go over it with them, read it to them and talk about it. I try to stay current in the program. I don't want it to get lazy or complacent about it. Even at 92.
Wow. Well, what a story, Tom.
Well, he's still going. During COVID, obviously, we didn't go to live meetings. We went to meetings online. The group that was our home group, started Zoom meetings on Fridays at noon, which was the same day that we used to meet live. And so for a couple of years during COVID, we attended those meetings regularly.
Yeah.
Then the places started opening up, and we went back to the restaurant where we used to meet on Fridays. And this guy took it upon himself to get that thing going again, because it was very catch as catch can. Nobody knew is the restaurant open, and the Zoom people split off and kept their own separate Friday noon.
Which meeting is that?
Back to basics.
Oh, back to basics, yeah.
So
I felt that it was important for somebody to be there because somebody might wander in that looks for a meeting. So I've been secretary for over 2 years, and I'll be there again tomorrow. And I pick somebody it's a step meeting, rotating step.
And tradition.
So, and tradition. Because traditions are overlooked, by the way, in the program, I think. I don't think there's enough time spent talking about traditions versus steps.
You'll find a lot of support for that thinking in the Third Legacy groups.
Well, I agree, because people are breaking their anonymity and they don't even understand what anonymity is. And if they would go through the traditions, they would understand what it's all about. And there are a lot of escapades in between that we didn't have time to talk about, that when I was drunk, I didn't end up where I was by being an angel.
Well, okay, what's a memorable escapade? And it can involve jail.
I went over a couple with you, but the Dunbar room, the house on Clyde Hill.
The blip. Good year.
One time in jail, you strip down, you have to take all your clothes off and put them in the center of the jail room. And they're going to put them in the delousers. And then they bring them back and put them back in, and then you take your clothes and put them back on, and you go to your cell. Well, I had a pair of trousers like this that were pretty good. And this other guy was wearing my trousers. I said, "Those are my trousers." And he said, "Who's wearing them?" And in jail, it's a whole different culture. Upper or lower bunk, what do you want, upper or lower? And I learned fast that you have to learn the language. One time in jail, they said, "What do you want, an upper or a lower?" I said, "I'll take an upper." Well, they're all taken. Well, I want an upper. They said, "Well, what are you in here for?" And I said, "I killed the guy with my bare hands." And they said, "Okay, you get the upper." Instead of saying, "I'm just a drunk," you had to make up some stories in order to get what you want.
You did a few little escapades at the Seattle World's Fair as well.
Oh yeah, the Seattle World's Fair was in full, it was 63, 64 and 65, something like that. And my best friend to this day was manager of the New York World's Fair exhibit. And he called me up and he said, be out at Inner Bay tomorrow. The Goodyear blimp, I made a deal with the captain to take us up in the Goodyear blimp. So I was there, and of course I had a few drinks beforehand. And I said, I was working at the Norton building at the time, downtown. And I said, how close can you go to the Norton building? He said, well, we're not supposed to go X number of feet. We have to stay away. I said, well, get as close as you can. And so I leaned out and waved to the people at the 13th floor of the Norton building where the office was. I was fired about 4 weeks after that.
The dancing, didn't you go dancing at the Spanish
Pavilion? The Spanish Pavilion was part of the World's Fair. And at intermission, they were changing costumes and the scenery. And the three of us got up on the stage and did a Jose Greco dance. And the police came and we were asked to leave. And it was raining cats and dogs, and there was still construction going on. And I fell into this hole, and I had my best suit on, and it was covered with mud. And I went home, and my wife the next day said, what in the hell happened to your suit? I threw it away. I said, that's my best suit. So,
and you lost your car.
I lost my car. I couldn't remember where I parked it. So Junius, we covered all the areas to finally find my car. 5 years out of Phi Gamma Delta University, every year they have what's called a pig dinner. It's a ceremony. Every fraternity, Phi Gamma Delta, has a pig dinner. It's a ceremony and you roast a whole pig and put it on a 2x4 platter. And so I was in charge of it 1 year. 5 years out, they picked somebody in charge. So obviously I was drunk and there was a pig all alone. And so I strapped it to the top of my car and drove through Seattle back home to Bellevue, the Sherwood Forest, where my home was. And of course, my wife at the time came into the bedroom and said, I don't know if you realize this or not, but you have a pig on the top of the car. And I said, yeah, I know. And she said, where did that come from? I said, from last night. So little headaches like this seem normal to me at the time.
Yeah, there's that great line in the doctor's opinion that the abnormal became normal.
Yeah, that's true.
But what you say though, and I think when you pick up back to basics, it's like
I gotta make it stop.
You got sober to pass it on, and that's what I think. That him picking up this back to basics meeting after COVID really demonstrates a commitment.
When I got the job at Smith Barney, part of the package was becoming an owner of the firm, a stockholder, which gave me, once they sold out, it gave me quite a bit of money, which was my blessing. It allowed me to retire at 62 and continue to volunteer.
Well, what an inspiration, Tom.
Well, it's a miracle. It really is. From when I shouldn't even be here.
Or maybe you should be. Here you are.
Maybe so.
Maybe AA's not done with you yet.
But some of those psychiatric hospitals and the jail, and I still remember it clearly. It was a real education. And hitting bottom, really hit bottom. You know, a lot of people on the 50th floor of a building, we all start on the 50th floor. And some people are smart enough on the 45th floor to get off and say, I think I've had enough. I haven't lost anything yet, but I don't know. I don't like the direction that I'm going. So I think I'm going to get into recovery. And so I went to the sub basement.
Well, you lived in your brother's basement. Remember, he was one of the people that you did a ninth step with. Your brother.
Yeah.
One of your only living relatives, really.
Yeah.
Lived in his brother's basement furnace room.
In the furnace room. And that little room I had on top of this house was not what you'd call great living. But and my career was amazing. I kept getting promotions, and I to this day, it still baffles me how I came back so far so fast. You know, a lot of times people don't get back. And I started as a clerk back, and then all of a sudden I was an owner of a Smith Barney.
Wow.
And it just doesn't happen. So
Except it does happen, and it happens in AA.
Yeah, and it happens because of the higher power. If you believe in the higher power and turn your life in your will over, step 3.
Oh, that was a Marine that called you back to come back from Houston up here too. He was same as you. Went to Quabblefield.
So that's a nutshell.
Well, Tom, thank you for your time, and
I don't know if that was helpful or.
AA will be better off because you shared your story. That's the way it works.
Good.